I am Carole Novielli. I am the research fellow at Live Action, and I'm also a writer and contributor for Live Action News.
And Carole, how long have you been with Live Action, and why did you start? What was the draw?
So Live Action onboarded me in 2016, and so that's about 8 years. And so I located to Florida, and that is when I really became interested in the research side of things. And so we had a number of abortion facilities there that were, doing some pretty horrific things. And I was doing a lot of documentation on like the abortion industry with regard to rape and abuse inside of the abortion industry. In other words, abortion providers that were sexually abusing women, which is a whole other story, and began to write about that. And I was also looking at medical board documents across the country and seeing a lot of the complaints that were being filed, which, for women to actually get to that place of filing a complaint, especially back in those days, it was pretty egregious stuff. And I started to just see a lot of these patterns developing within the abortion movement. And so I had the opportunity to relocate to Texas, and in that time did a lot of research on Planned Parenthood, on their eugenic background, on the covering of child sex abuse, and all of these other types of topics, along with the abortion industry in general. And so from there it came fast forward to 2016 when I was able to take a position with Live Action.
And Carole, many people know Live Action, but for those who may not remember or don't know, can you describe some of the early investigative work of particularly Lila Rose?
Yeah, so Lila Rose is our founder, and she pretty much started the organization in 2003. Lila was, she literally went into multiple Planned Parenthood and abortion facilities with video, where she literally went in and got recordings of Planned Parenthood staff coaching her as a 13-year-old, posing in many cases as someone who had a boyfriend who was 31 years old. Like there's no gray area with regard to that. And they're basically saying, we don't want to know the age. That's rape, that's abuse, that would have to be reported. And they were literally coaching her, how to skirt parental consent laws, how to do judicial bypasses, how to not say the age of the quote unquote boyfriend as an investigator, unknowing that she was an undercover person. They literally thought she was a 13-year-old child, and they're giving her this. And so this is another instance where information has come forward and it just confirms what's already been out there, which says that Planned Parenthood is systemically covering for child sex abuse. And so that's one of the many undercover investigations. There was another one in 2011 where Live Action sent in undercover investigators posing as being in the sex worker business. So basically they were pimps, and they were asking and inquiring about all kinds of care at Planned Parenthood. And they did mention that they had some younger girls working for them, and I believe the age of 14 was brought up. And again, these workers, if you watch the undercover investigations on our website, you can go to our website, liveaction.org, and then look under investigations, look under aiding abusers. You can see clips from all of these investigations. And what really sort of stunned me was just the overly gleeful way that these workers were like, yeah, we can help you. Yeah, no problem. We've got this, we've got that service. You can have them come in. We're not going to really check IDs. And one particular worker was like, well, let's just see, like 15 and up, not so much of a problem. 14, we might have some issues. And it's just sad to think that this was, a man and a woman coming in basically saying that they were in charge of these women that they were putting out into sex work, who weren't really women making up their own minds. These were, in many cases, minors that they were talking about openly, and still Planned Parenthood was very gleeful. In fact, one of the facilities out in New Jersey, it just, when it hit the news, it was pretty outrageous. And some of the statements that she made, she literally was like, look, You got 14-year-olds, she's circling on a piece of paper, just like, you can take them here, you can take them here, you can take them here. And it's just so outrageous that there was no advocacy on behalf of those children. It was all, let's do what we can to bring in this business. It was all dollar signs, it appeared to be. And so there's just been a number of those types of investigations that have been done by Live Action and have been put out there, and that confirm what we found with regard to actual cases and other types of, talking to previous former Planned Parenthood workers and other forms of information through studies. And so these aren't just one, segregated investigation from some anti-abortion group, but it's confirming what's out there in actual real cases. And still we find that Planned Parenthood is currently receiving, upwards of $700 million a year in just tax funding. And multiple states are just sending them money. And it's just sickening, because no matter what program you look at the federal level, and multiple state agencies all would require the reporting of child sex abuse, mandatory reporters as they are. And this is time and again, it's been exposed that they're not doing this. I'm not saying that they never do it, but the numbers of cases we were able to find where there was egregious incidences of 12-year-olds, 13, 14, this is no gray area. And yet these cases don't appear to have been reported. And these girls went on to be abused for upwards of, years, some of them 7 years later. It's just stomach churning, and it's heartbreaking, and it makes you angry to think that this continues to happen. And what are they rewarded with? More millions and billions of dollars over the course of their history. Just wash, rinse, repeat, do the exact same thing with no accountability. What we find time and again is that people who have done studies with, say, sex trafficking victims, they'll tell you in these studies that they were taken to Planned Parenthood because of their, quote, don't ask, don't tell policies, because they were easy to deal with, or they didn't charge any money. So Planned Parenthood's website literally states, and I'm going to quote it, it says, if one of your teachers, a family member, your boss at work, or anyone much older than you does anything sexual with you, that's sexual abuse, even if you agree with it. Okay? Now, you would assume this is directed maybe more at adults, but it is clear that would involve children as well. I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? And then Planned Parenthood's own glossary of terms, which is on their website, it describes statutory rape as, quote, illegally, sexual contact between an adult and anyone who is below the age of consent, whether or not the contact is voluntary. So they know the red flags. I mean, we've reported on this at Live Action News. In fact, Planned Parenthood says, they wrote this in 2013, that teenage girls with older partners are more likely to become pregnant than those with partners closer in age. Likewise, teenage boys with older partners are more likely to father a child. Where do children go when they're found to be pregnant? They go to Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood also says a study found that 6.7% of women aged 15 to 17 have partners 6 or more years older than they are. Okay, that right there gives you, that's a relatively small percentage from other studies. But right there, they know that a pretty large, almost 7% of teenagers that are coming to them have partners 6 or more years. That puts you over into the age of an adult, right? And so what happens, whether or not you're consenting, you have much younger children who are engaging in sex, and statistics show that younger children engaging in sex usually always is indicative of having an older partner, usually an adult, who is, encouraging this behavior. Even the Guttmacher, which is a former research arm of Planned Parenthood, on their website claimed, on average, young people in the United States have sex for the first time at the age of 17, right? On average. Yet Planned Parenthood's seeing 12, 13, 14-year-olds and turning a blind eye.
Yeah, and Carole, throughout this series, we're going to be just talking to a variety of people on the topic of forced, coerced, pressured, unwanted abortions. But really the stuff that you're describing is more firmly in the forced category, or the imbalance of power between a minor and an adult. I mean, just truly truly awful stuff. In your extensive investigative reporting and research, what are some common themes that you've heard from former Planned Parenthood workers, or even uncovered and unearthed about, Planned Parenthood itself and current workers, well, when they shared about the culture of abuse reporting? What is that like, that culture there on the abuse reporting?
So we did talk to a number of former Planned Parenthood workers who repeatedly said that Planned Parenthood had basically a don't ask, don't tell, or they were highly discouraged from reporting, that even their coworkers were like, hey, this will get you into, you can report it, but, there's going to be problems. We find that Planned Parenthood, itself, in our investigation, repeatedly coached the girls to lie about the age of their boyfriends. They were like, la, 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 I didn't hear you just say that. Then they, of course, when we exposed it, they would deny the accusation and claim that they would retrain staffers. Yet, a former Planned Parenthood employee by the name of Ramona Trevino told us in an interview that she was working at Planned Parenthood when we released one of our investigations, and they were telling the media, oh yeah, well that was kind of like an anomaly. And then they said that she was working for Planned Parenthood at the time, that they were claiming that they were just going to retrain staffers. Sorry, they should know better, this kind of attitude. And what she found was, when she attended one of these trainings, was that there was no actual retraining. The training itself was how to identify and spot undercover investigators, such as those coming from live action, to know whether they're being recorded or doing a gotcha on them. And so where was the retraining? But they were telling the media there was all this retraining. And the former staffers also told live action that they witnessed, quote, girls coming in with their abusers against all protocol. So yes, on paper, there is protocol, right? They have to have that. But it said against all protocol, the abuser would be left in the counseling room with these women. They would describe women that some of them didn't speak good English. Others were just like their boyfriends, or they were claiming to be boyfriends, were very controlling, very much like taking control of the conversation, answering questions on behalf of the woman who was looking down, looking serene. And some of the Planned Parenthood, former Planned Parenthood workers were very uncomfortable with this. And but when they were inquiring about it with their managers, one of the former staffers told us that her manager told her, quote, she's better off with the abortion. We can't do anything about what's going on at home. Now, if you listen to what's put out there by Planned Parenthood, there's all kinds of things that they claim to stand for. And yet when they have a woman, in their facility, according to these former staffers, who is, fitting that bill of being controlled, they're just like, get the abortion at all costs, because that's what's going to make her better. That's what is going to better her life. It's very sad. It's a very low bar, and it's not even true. And then another staffer told us, if we saw a case of questionable abuse, or even for sure, this kid is being abused, we really were discouraged from calling it in. And so this is coming from their own staff, their former staff. We're told, trust women. Yet when these women come up and give their stories, the media is like, nope, not going to believe that.
Also, the women who were affected, I've read testimonials from minors who were raped or forced into abortions by their abuser and then aided by Planned Parenthood. Do you mind sharing one or two of those stories or lawsuits against Planned Parenthood where the survivor prevailed in that situation?
In one of the cases, and I'm only going to use her first name, involved a young girl by the name of Denise. She was literally raped by her father at the age of 13. She then becomes pregnant at the age of 16, and her father, he took her to Planned Parenthood for an abortion. Now, once there, according to her attorney, Brian Hurley, who we also interviewed, and all of this can be found on our aiding abusers investigative reports. But Brian Hurley, her attorney, was like, hey, while in the counseling room, they're like, young lady, you should be on birth control if you're going to be having sex, blah, 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 blah. And she got a little bit incensed by that, because she's like, listen, she literally stood up for herself and told the Planned Parenthood counselor, I am not voluntarily having sex. I am being raped by my father, who is literally out in your waiting room, right? What did Planned Parenthood do in that case? Nothing. They didn't call the police. They didn't assure her they would protect her. They literally did the abortion on her. And then, according to the lawsuit, they turned her back over to her abuser, where she suffered at his hands for another year and a half. So according to the lawsuit, it was not Planned Parenthood that called in. The lawsuit literally talks about Planned Parenthood's, quote, don't ask, don't tell policies, practices. It was, it ended up being her basketball coach when she started to talk to the coach about the abuse that literally called law enforcement. And in that, what was interesting about the lawsuit, other than the horrific details of her, what she endured even after she left Planned Parenthood facility, was some of the stats that they cited. In the lawsuit, it said that Planned Parenthood, this is the claim from the lawsuit, Planned Parenthood knew every time a pregnant minor who had been infected by a sexually transmitted infection arrived at its clinic, more probable than not that the minor was a victim of sexual abuse. That knowledge was in part based on following information Planned Parenthood had in its own training files. So it's not just the pregnancy that the girls are being brought in for. They're brought in for other types of care, STIs. In one report we read, they were brought in for birth control. And yet Planned Parenthood, according to this lawsuit, their own training materials know these stats. And so there's so many egregious. I know one of the ones that I was really sort of broken up by was a case where this predator by the name of George Savannah was repeatedly raping his daughter. He impregnated her three times at the age of 14, 16, and 17, and each time brought her to Planned Parenthood to cover up his crimes. And the reports Planned Parenthood used in court confirmed that Savannah took the teen to Planned Parenthood for abortions. No one else knew the victim's pregnancies except who? Planned Parenthood and the abuser. The court document stated that the sexual assaults only became public once the victim, not Planned Parenthood, spoke to her aunt about the abuse. And this was 7 years after the victim was taken for her first abortion at Planned Parenthood. So imagine you can't stop maybe the first assault, but you left that girl 7 years. And this, I believe, was multiple Planned Parenthoods. And this isn't just like, oh, he said, she said, some teenager is trying to get out of trouble making this claim, false accusation type stuff. No, Savannah was convicted on 2 counts of third-degree rape of a child, 2 counts of first-degree incest, sexually abusing his daughter, impregnating her for 3 times, and sentenced to 120 months for all counts, plus 18 months of community custody. And the information that we found came out in his appeal. That's where it became public. But the information that it was clear that it was not Planned Parenthood that called it in and protected that young girl. And so we see this time and again, but it's not just solely Planned Parenthood. This is systemic in the abortion movement, in the abortion industry.
I think what they would say in this situation, which is, well, that was just in Florida, or this is just in one region or one center in this area of the country. But in fact, the report that you put on my radar, The Health Consequences of Sex Trafficking, which was published by Loyola University, Chicago's Beasley Institute for Health Law and Policy, it highlighted, and this is shocking, that Planned Parenthood was the top most visited facility for trafficking victims, second only to hospital emergency rooms. Why is that, do you think?
You know, in another study that we published and wrote about at Live Action News that was published by the Journal of Human Trafficking, they found that, quote, among those who used community clinics in the surveys that they took of sex trafficked women, all but one visited a Planned Parenthood clinic because Planned Parenthood was, quote, familiar and helpful, unquote. And so in this report that you were speaking of, the person who wrote that report, Laura Lederer, I think is how she pronounces it, she's a senior advisor at the Trafficking in Persons for the U.S. Department of State, or was back in the day. And she interviewed these victims of sex trafficking victims, and I'm not saying they were all minors. Some of them might have been older, but they basically said that they were forced to abort their babies. Almost a third of human trafficking survivors visited a Planned Parenthood affiliate, and that she said she was taken there because, quote, unquote, or this was one of the reasons that one of the victims said, Planned Parenthood didn't ask any questions. They also received medical services from providers who knew they were being controlled by a pimp. And then one of those sex trafficked survivors, she was coerced into aborting 17 forced abortions. Then a national study funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention of the U.S. Department of Justice wrote this, quote, their study is described this way: a cross-sectional survey of female patients in 5 family planning clinics affiliated with Planned Parenthood in Northern California found that of the 9% of young women ages 16 to 29 who sought services at these family planning clinics, 16% reported pimp involvement. 16%. So this is not in any way an anomaly. Our investigative research was reviewed by an expert on human trafficking who wrote this. She said, quote, after viewing the Planned Parenthood video, my first thoughts were of the victims I have served over the last 8 years, specifically the women and girls and their horrendous statements of rape, gang rapes, torture, branding, starvation, extortions, assault, and their reports of repeated forced abortions and miscarriages due to the trauma they received. I have often wondered where these multiple abortions took place, how medical professionals had not seen the extensive trauma to their bodies, spirits, and souls. If you're a lawmaker, don't close your eyes. If you're media, if you're a journalist, don't close your ears.
Carole, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing all of this and opening our eyes to what's happening today in this country, across the country. We now know that this is not an anomaly, and we will continue to follow your research and others out there on forced, sex trafficked, and coerced abortions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.